This guy was great. I had a lengthy exchange with him on Twitter this weekend. He was doing all the wrong reasoning. First of all, he's making this about the shooting about gun laws. It's got nothing to do with gun laws. Aaron Fortson was legally privileged to have a gun in his apartment. He's legally privileged to have it in his hand. That's got nothing to do with whether or not his shooting was lawful. He was well within his rights to be armed. And the weapon, as we can clearly see on video, wasn't pointed at the officer. Well, that's not a gun law question. That's a use of force law question, and it doesn't matter. We'll get to that. And then, of course, the racial angle. I wonder what you would say if he had been white, you racist Andrew Branca. Another one from the same guy, Pinkerton. A man shot for holding a gun in his own home has nothing to do with gun laws. Are you high? No, I'm not high. I'm just right. And then the stand your ground laws down here in Florida, 100% applied to this man. Had nothing to do with stand your ground law, this shooting. The Lord of Chaos. The facts are that the shooting someone because they lawfully possess a gun in their home is not and never has been justified self-defense. I would suggest that's not the reason the deputy is going to give why he shot. He's not randomly knocking on doors and seeing if the homeowner comes to the door with a gun in hand so he can shoot him. If the deputy just wanted to shoot people holding a gun, he could go to any gun store in Florida, walk up to the counter where everyone's holding a gun in their hand, and just shoot them. Does anybody believe that's what happened here? The deputy was just looking for a completely non-threatening person to be holding a gun so he could shoot him dead? That's a childlike view of this event. More Pinkerton. A man answers the door armed on suspicion of the police not being who they say they are. Something you recently made a video about in defense of and is shot for it. But you're saying his rights by law in the state of Florida weren't violated. You're full of it. Well, as we'll see, Pinkerton here is speaking to Aaron Fortson and his state of mind in going to the door with a gun, right? That he may have suspected whoever was knocking, claiming to police was not actually police. Fair enough. And totally irrelevant. Aaron Fortson's state of mind is totally irrelevant to whether his shooting by the deputy was lawful. In terms of evaluating whether the deputy's use of force was lawful, the only state of mind that matters is the deputy's state of mind. My response here, the legal reality you appear incapable of grasping. Roger Fortson could have, is it Roger or Aaron? Am I getting their name wrong there? That would be awkward. Let's see. Let me double check that right now. Not that it matters for purposes of legal and Roger Fortson. Not that it matters for purposes of legal analysis, but there you go. Let's see. Someone will tell me that the first name matters. It makes a difference. I'll save that there. You know why? Because I was thinking of the Aaron Dean prosecution. That's the police officer who went to the apparent burglary in progress, shot the woman homeowner inside her house, shot her through. He was outside with a flashlight, shot through the window, killed her, and was prosecuted and convicted. Very similar legal dynamics there, and that was just a miscarriage of justice, that particular case. I guess that's where Aaron came from. But in any case, Roger Fortson. The legal reality you appear incapable of grasping. Roger Fortson could have done everything right and done nothing wrong, and his shooting by law enforcement could still be 100% justified. I understand you don't like this reality, but reality does not care about your feelings. More Pinkerton. So in defending the cops, you posted a subsection that granted Fortson the right to defend himself with deadly force. Fortson the right to defend himself. What I had posted was the Florida self-defense statute, 776012. As he had asked for, well, show me a law that would justify this shooting by this deputy. Okay, self-defense. That's the self-defense statute. And he seizes on the notion that, well, Roger Fortson could have claimed that self-defense statute would have justified him shooting the cop. Sure. If Roger Fortson had been quicker than the deputy and shot the deputy dead, I expect Roger Fortson would have claimed self-defense under Florida Statute 776012. That doesn't mean the deputy's shooting of him was unlawful. Both parties can be in the right. They could both have fired simultaneously and shot each other simultaneously, and both bullets could be perfectly lawful. No wonder you're selling people self-defense seminars for $200. You're too shitty a lawyer to ever win a case. Just say you hate black gun owners. Be honest. Okay. Who are we talking about? Another Twitter account. Fortson knew someone claiming to be law enforcement was at the door, which is a tactic used by thugs. Fortson was complying, never raised the gun. Cops are supposed to be held to a higher standard because of their training, not just see a gun and start firing. And of course, I respond, literally doesn't matter what Fortson knew or was thinking. Completely irrelevant to a legal analysis of the criminal liability of the deputy for this shooting. Another one. Completely misunderstanding what the legal standard is, what the legal question is. All these people are arriving at the wrong legal conclusion because they don't even know the correct legal question. And we're going to get to that because the correct legal question is stated in the Florida jury instruction on deadly use of force in self-defense. Ben Madison. What law did Fortson break? I'll wait. Literally irrelevant. Not required for Fortson to have actually broken any law in order for his shooting death by the deputy to be perfectly lawful, perfectly justified. Fluster clucking. You assume he knew. I guess he means that Fortson knew it was a cop outside. He could have had headphones on, talking with his girlfriend, and only heard the banging and not the announcement that the deputy was a law enforcement officer. The gun is pointed at the floor. This was a twitchy cop shooting a lawfully armed homeowner. Get bent. Okay. You assume he knew. Literally does not matter what Fortson knew or didn't know. Fortson's state of mind is irrelevant to the criminal liability, if any, of the deputy. The fact that the gun is pointed at the floor doesn't mean the deputy's shooting was unlawful. The deputy's not required to wait until an armed suspect points the muzzle at him before he can defend himself. The deputy is allowed to make an evaluation of the threat against him based on the totality of the circumstances. And there are more facts here than Roger Fortson standing there with a gun pointed down. This was a twitchy cop shooting a lawfully armed homeowner. Well, twitchy is just a subjective characterization. And the deputy can lawfully shoot a lawfully armed homeowner. That's allowed under the appropriate conditions, as we'll see in the Florida jury instruction. Then Alex said, this was another great one, a great account for this weekend. Since other certain pro-cop guys refuse to answer, maybe you will. What laws did Roger Fortson break? Again, it doesn't matter whether or not Fortson broke a law or not. That's not required for this shooting to be lawful. As I responded, utterly irrelevant. It's not necessary that the victim of a use of force event have done anything wrong in order for that use of force to be lawful. Helvidius Priscus, who I'm familiar with on Twitter and normally has pretty good takes. I like that account. Writes, this shooting was brought to you by the exact same sheriff's office that Mag dumped because an acorn fell. Are you beginning to see a pattern here? Well, this is why we have rules of evidence, folks, because emotionally people make these kinds of connections and try to extrapolate from one to the other. You may remember I covered the case of the deputy who discharged his gun when he was walking by his patrol car and an acorn hit the top of his patrol car and made a, loud noise, I guess. What does that deputy's conduct have to do with whether or not this shooting was lawful? Legally. Nothing. But human beings are pattern recognition machines. We love our patterns. We love to see trends. We love to extrapolate from one event to another event. But courts have rules of evidence because this is not reasoning. This acorn event is literally legally irrelevant to whether or not this shooting by this deputy of Roger Fortson was lawful. Nothing One event has literally nothing to do with the other in the context of the criminal liability of this deputy. Now, might there be some broader civil suit against the department? And might there be a pattern of poor training, inadequate training by this department that makes them more liable in monetary damages for the Acorn event and for this? Sure. But I don't do civil law, folks, and I'm not seeking to argue why this department should not be held civilly liable. I don't care if they're held civilly liable. I do criminal law. The question here is whether or not this deputy ought to be criminally liable for his use of force against Roger Fortson. Mr. Leadslinger, another Twitter account that I really like, has great content. But a bad take here. Many cops are ready to shoot you for doing something totally legal and non-threatening. Really? Is that what we really believe? That many cops are walking around looking for people who are doing something the cop recognizes as totally legal and totally non-threatening. The cop looks at that and says, well, that's legal and that's non-threatening, and I'm going to shoot you for that. Does anybody believe that's what's happening? Really? He writes, you should never open the door for cops. You should also dry fire and shoot regularly to range to get fast and accurate. Okay. I mean, sure. If you're going to be handling guns for serious purposes, you ought to be proficient with your guns. You should never open the door for cops. Okay. I mean, do what you like. Again, it's not necessary that Roger Fortson had done anything wrong. So whatever his conduct in terms of its lawfulness or prudence is irrelevant to the deputy's decision-making here, whether it's lawful, whether the deputy's decision-making was lawful. I would suggest that it's probably imprudent to answer the door with a handgun in plain sight. I don't know why you would do that. I generally have a gun on my person all the time. So I generally have a gun on my person when I answer the door. Sometimes I might even have a gun in hand when I answer the door. But it's not in plain sight. Especially if I don't know who's on the other side of that door. Scare the crap out of my neighbors? Come on. Ex-Republican boomer. Oh, this is another one. People last night started talking about rules of engagement for the military. When I was in the military, my rules for engagement would never have allowed me to shoot Roger Fortson. Okay. I don't know. Thank you for your service, by the way. I don't know anything about your rules of engagement in the military. What I do know is that your rules of engagement in the military have nothing to do with this shooting. There's nothing about military rules of engagement in combat that would make this shooting of Roger Fortson either more or less legal, because this is not a military context. The relevant rules of engagement for this deputy is Florida law, as we'll see in the Florida jury instruction. So you can talk about military rules of engagement all you like if it makes you, I don't know, emotionally satisfied, but you're not engaged in a reasoned understanding of this shooting. You're just talking about stuff that doesn't matter. All right, so all of that. Twitter. There's thousands of those things I could have pointed out. Those are just a handful that I screen captured in real time, so I'd have them to share with all of you today. All right, so what are the actually relevant rules of engagement? So I'm going to go through this first before we look at the body-worn camera video and before we listen to the Okaloosa Sheriff's Department's presentation of their view of this event. The view that's favorable, of course, to their deputy, and the view that's presumed to be true until proven otherwise beyond a reasonable doubt by a prosecution in court. And I guess I would say, unless you could, point to a patent lie, right? Patent lies are possible. They could say, for example, that this deputy never fired a shot. It must have been somebody behind him who shot Roger Fortson. I mean, that would obviously be a patent lie. But absent that, If this is simply something, a presentation of the event that's subject to interpretation, the law requires that interpretation presumptively to be in favor of the deputy, who's presumed innocent until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. So let's take a look at what Florida law actually requires, and things in particular I want you to keep your eyes open for is, at what point do the Florida jury instructions on the use of deadly force in self-defense talk about the state of mind of the victim of that use of force? At what point do the Florida jury instructions require that for the use of deadly defensive force to be lawful, the person against whom the force is used has to have been doing something wrong, actually doing something wrong, actually engaged in some criminal conduct, actually be threatening anybody? Because if you're watching for those as we step through the jury instruction, I think you'll have difficulty finding those conditions for the use of deadly force in self-defense under Florida law because they do not exist. So these are the actual jury instructions that would be given to a Florida jury in this case. Now, I should mention jury instructions when they're in their primary form. So if you look it up on the internet, there's kind of a fill in the blanks aspect to them. So, for example, it'll say things like, a person is privileged to use deadly force in self-defense if he, she, and you would pick the correct pronoun for a particular case. If the defendant, it'll say in brackets, and you're supposed to replace the defendant with the name of the defendant. So I've done that here. I filled in the blanks. Nothing I've done has substantively changed the jury instruction. You'll have to trust me on that, or just go look it up for yourself.